So today's Noirvember film, I actually wasn't expecting to be my Noirvember film because I did not know going into this film that it was a noir. Mostly because what I had read about it made it sound like a throwback '90s John Grisham film, and it was it not that at all. And you'll read a lot about this film, and I think that maybe you should try not to and just go in and watch it without knowing about its uh, background or really what critics are saying, because I fear it's a movie that has been mismarketed and misunderstood. That's what I'm going to say. This is Dan Gilroy's Roman J. Israel Esquire. It was originally called Inner City. This film was made really fast. It was announced last year. It filmed literally this summer, and then they released it at Toronto, and it did not do well. It got recut. It's one of those with like this crazy production history that is more what people are talking about than the film itself. And like I said, I was expecting sort of a John Grisham-esque thing based on the trailer and based on what people had said, and they were comparing it to The Verdict. And I don't think any of those things are what this film is trying to be. If you saw Dan Gilroy's debut a few years ago, Nightcrawler, that was a throwback neo-noir. Like, it was a neo-noir. I think this one is just a neo-noir based on a sort of subset of noirs that aren't usually the noirs people talk about, because it's not the noirs with femme fatales, and it's not the noirs with murderers. It's the noirs with characters who are tempted down a path. Characters who are good people who get tempted down a path, and before they can redeem themselves, because you can't redeem yourself, they die. Spoilers for this movie. Sorry. That was a big spoiler, actually. I'm really sorry I said that. But I mean, if you're going into it knowing it's a noir, I hope you expect that everyone dies, because that's sort of how noirs work. Really good noirs, everyone dies at the end. And this one starts out, it hits a lot of noir beats in that it starts out almost like Double Indemnity, with the lead character sort of explaining like, hey brah, this is how I got to where I'm at. Only in this case, instead of dictating a insurance memo, he is dictating a legal brief, basically saying like why he should be disbarred and kicked out of the human race, because he fell down a rabbit hole of excess and illegality that goes against everything that he stands for, and even he can't even forgive himself, really. Although he gives a speech towards the end where he kind of talks about forgiving himself, but I don't know that anyone buys it. The film co-stars Colin Farrell, and I gotta say, it's probably one of the best filmed appearances of Colin Farrell I've ever seen. This is coming from a 20-year Colin Farrell fan. Not 20 years, 15 years. How long has he been around? I think I was 16. 15, I think 16-year Colin Farrell fan, so a long time. He looks beautiful in this film. And he would be what you would expect to be sort of the villain character, but in a true noir sense, the villain is also the hero. The villain is Denzel's own hubris and his own weaknesses as a person. And the Colin Farrell character, he comes in, so let's go back to the plot now. Roman J. Israel is a lawyer who is on the autism spectrum, and they call him a savant in this film, but really, I mean, I believe being a savant falls on the spectrum, but he's not, he has his own way of being, and he clearly has a different set of mental capabilities. And this is something that's not discussed in a lot of the reviews I read. A lot of them just called him fidgety and all kinds of things, and I was like, y'all, did you miss that he's clearly on the spectrum, and that's why he is unable to perform sort of the basic tenets of courtroom law, because of the way his brain works. He cannot function the way that law is set up. And what's interesting is the way in which you see him going into law, trying to behave how you would think law should behave, but then you see that like any sort of industry or what's the word I'm looking for? Facet of society, institution, that's what I'm looking for. Like any institution, there are rules and there are ways in which people must operate, and they aren't necessarily always for the best. And he is a person who sees how things really should be, and when they don't behave that way, it causes him to sort of self-destruct a little bit. So when he's forced into this world where he has to work amongst rules that don't fit with who he is, that's when things start to spiral. But also his longtime partner, they've been working together for almost 40 years, leaves, and so he has this emotional sort of hole in his life. And as a lot of us know, when we go through grieving, bad decisions get made, and bad decisions happen in this film. So I already spoiled the end, but I don't really want to spoil the rest of it because I want you sort of to see how he spirals to where he spirals. There's a great performance from Carmen Ejogo. I think she's one of the great working actresses today. She always brings such true humanity to her roles. So I guess what I think is also interesting is that all three of these characters, they're all working in law or in the legal profession, and they all have different layers of goodness about them, and different layers of whether they're what's the word I'm looking for? Not naivete, but sense of hope within their profession and within the world that they function. And Roman starts on one side of that equation and winds up on the other, but then through going through that realizes that maybe this isn't the best choice and he made bad decisions. And unfortunately, because we're in a noir, those decisions are going to come to haunt him to the end. I just thought this was a great film. Beautiful cinematography by Robert Elswit. He also shot Nightcrawler. I think if you come at this film looking at noir like Beyond a Reasonable Doubt or Boomerang, or I'm just reading a bunch of Dana Andrews legal thriller noirs, but there's several of these noirs from the late 40s, early 50s that are about the corruption of institutions and people who fight against the corruptions of institutions. And that's sort of what this film does, and what the character's main sort of thrust is, and the fact that even though he's trying to break down the corruption within this system, he is unable to do so because he is tempted and loses that battle. I think this movie has a lot to say about contemporary criminal justice, and I think it's just maybe because it's mixing a couple of things, and it's not 100% noir, and it has a quasi-hopeful ending for the world, not for the character. I think maybe that mesh of hope mixed with the dread that is this character doesn't quite work for everybody. I want to say it's a great Los Angeles noir. The main character lives in Bunker Hill. There are tons of Bunker Hill noirs. One of my favorites is Act of Violence. But there's several more. Look up Bunker Hill. Cry Danger is another great one. Any movie I think that still has a character living on Bunker Hill is a noir, just in my brain. You also have just, there's just so much going on in this movie. I just think it's much better than it's given credit for, and maybe in a few years people will see. I also want more people to be talking about his performance and what it means to have a character like this that is on the spectrum, existing in such a big budget wide release. Like, this never happens, and I feel like fidgety is like I saw multiple reviewers call the character fidgety, and I'm like, do you even know what he was doing in this performance? Like, God, it's frustrating. So this was Dan Gilroy's Roman J. Israel Esquire, and it stars Denzel Washington and Colin Farrell and Carmen Ejogo. I think that it is absolutely a great Los Angeles noir. Fits into a whole bunch of fighting the system noirs, and you should definitely check it out.